Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Expert Witness Show. I am your host, David Smith, and today's show is brought to you by Alpine Engineering and Design, your first call for mechanical engineering expert witnesses. Now, today I wanted to talk a little bit about how testing and videos can be used effectively when evaluating a case and in showing and proving your opinions. And to illustrate this, I wanted to tell a story about a teacher who was using an aerial lift for a science project. So this was a project that a number of grades in the school had been working on, and they were doing an egg drop challenge. I'm sure you've probably heard of these and are familiar with them. In any case, the students are given certain materials, usually straws and tape and whatever else they might be able to use, and are given a certain amount of time where they can create a contraption that will keep an egg from breaking when dropped from a certain height. And this is what the school had been doing, what they had been working on, and on the day of the test, to see whose contraptions would keep the egg from breaking and whose wouldn't, they had rented an aerial lift so that they could go up to a certain height, about 50 feet, and drop these contraptions from the bucket onto the ground. And because they'd been doing this with multiple grades, there were about 600 kids out watching as they dropped these contraptions. And there had been multiple teachers that had gone up with the operator on this day, and as they were finishing up, right towards the end, this teacher and the operator were coming down. They were actually on their way down after testing the last one, and decided to do a 360 in the truck, or in the basket, and go all the way around the truck, just to show all the kids what this really cool aerial lift could do. And as they were going around the truck, there was a catastrophic failure, and the boom and the basket, which was still about 30 feet in the air, just came crashing down. The operator actually died from the accident, and the teacher was sent to the hospital in critical condition. And so the question really became, why, after this had been being used all day, why did it fail catastrophically right at the end? And as the inspection was being done, they found that there were a number of bolts in the turntable slewing ring that had just come out. So the way these aerial lifts are built is that you have the truck frame, and attached to the truck frame is what you call a pedestal, and it sits there, it's stationary. And on top of the pedestal, you bolt a slewing ring. And so the slewing ring is a big bearing, and so one of the tracks of the bearing stays stationary and one of them moves with the part of the lift that is above it. And so the part of this that had been bolted to the pedestal was bolted on with 20 bolts, and it turns out 9 of them had just fallen out and were in the pedestal unharmed, while the other 11 had broken and fractured, which allowed the lift to come down. And so there was a lot of discrepancy in different people's opinions on how these bolts came out and why they weren't there. And admittedly, you are supposed to check these bolts every time before you get in the lift, and I don't think that had been done on this day. And if it had have been done, they probably would have found at least some, if not all, of the 9 bolts had already fallen out. But either way, they used the lift and were trying to figure out why these bolts fell out. So what we did is we did some testing. Our hypothesis was that as this aerial lift, as the basket and the arms move back and forth as they're adjusting, it puts a little bit of force on these bolts every time. If you're moving to the right and then stop, and then you move to the left and then stop, and then move to the right and then stop, it puts a little bit of force on these bolts. And for bolts that are not torqued properly, that are not sufficiently tight, those can actually work themselves out. And that was our opinion in this case, but something that we didn't just want to say, yes, I know this happens, I'm an expert, you have to trust me. And so instead of just because I said so, we decided to run a test to show that this could actually happen. And so what we did is we acquired an exemplar slewing ring, and based off of the manufacturer's engineering drawings, we were able to make the top of the pedestal and the bottom of the turret, the two pieces that attach to either side of the slewing ring. And we bolted those on, and we made a contraption that would wiggle them relative to each other. So start and stop, start and stop, start and stop. And what we found and what we were able to show with this contraption is that it takes, if you don't have the bolts torqued all the way, it takes just a very few cycles to get those bolts to work themselves out. And we made a video showing our contraption, and we'd tighten the bolts in by hand and then start this device to make it move back and forth. And then just a minute or two later, you could actually watch as the bolts started to fall out of the bottom. And it was a very, very convincing movie to show that this is exactly what happened. The bolts just worked themselves out and fell out and were held in the pedestal. And then the way they had been using it during the day, the side of the pedestal, or the side with no bolts, had been in compression. And as they were going up and down, if it's in compression, the bolts aren't doing a whole lot to keep that in place. But as they decided to do this 360-degree rotation around the truck at the very end, the side with no bolts that was in compression suddenly turned to be in tension, and there were no bolts to keep that from falling over, to keep that attached down to the slewing ring. And the ones that were there on the compression side just didn't have sufficient strength to keep it from failing. And so that's what happened. And this was a case where, because they had the video and because they could see that this is exactly what happened and that we could prove our opinions rather than just saying this is what I think happened, it settled very quickly and very favorably for our clients. Unfortunately, there was still a death that probably shouldn't have happened and really was unnecessary, but at the very least, the operator's family was taken care of after that. So think about your cases, what you're doing, and see if there are any opinions that could be bolstered or shown through testing and video, so that you're not just relying on the expert and because he said so. It works out better. It's something that we try to do. Take care. Have a good day.